Good evening, I'm Abe.
And I'm Frank. And today, we're adumbrating the second half of Chapter 29, Wilsonian Progressivism at Home and Abroad. Kennedy, Cohen, and Bailey's The American Pageant textbook. I'll start us off once again. Now, Wilson, he hated Taft's policy of dollar diplomacy, and he thus declared that government would no longer give support to Americans investing in China or Latin America. Secondly, Wilson approved the Jones Act, which gave the Philippines official territorial status and promised independence if a stable government was established. In fact, in 1946, 3 decades later, a stable government was established, and the Philippines were finally freed from American rule. In 1915, Wilson sent Marines to Haiti to protect Americans living there. Haiti became an American protectorate, and America was allowed to supervise finances and police inside Haiti. So with Wilson, we see a mixed bag of withdrawing back into the country, but with acceptable outreaches into Latin America. But Abe, can you elaborate on Wilson's actions towards South American countries?
Of course. The Mexicans revolted in 1913 and installed Victoriano Huerta as their president. Since American lives and property were compromised during the Mexican Revolution, Wilson imposed an arms embargo and did not formally recognize the revolutionary government of Huerta. Tensions came to a boiling point with the Tampico Incident, in which a small group of American sailors were arrested. Before Congress could legislate, Wilson ordered the Navy to seize Veracruz, a Mexican port, to prevent a shipment of guns and ammunition from arriving to Huerta. Huerta's regime collapsed and a man named Venustiano Carranza succeeded him. A Mexican named Pancho Villa challenged Carranza and attempted to provoke war between US and Mexico by murdering 16 American mining engineers and later on by murdering more Americans in New Mexico. The American General Pershing eventually subdued Pancho's rebel band. So Frank, could you tell me how the famed World War I began?
Absolutely. And I think to fully get this point across, I'll have to read to you John Keegan's The First World War. So let's begin. The First World War was a tragic and unnecessary conflict. Unnecessary because the train of events that led to its... Well, pro tip, always have a plan B. I'll make this quick. Basically, World War I fully broke out because of a complex system of alliances between the European powers. After Gavrilo Princip, a Serbian nationalist, shot and killed Franz Ferdinand of Austria, the two countries eventually went to war. The problem is both countries had outlying alliances with other countries. Serbia was allied with Russia and France, and Austria-Hungary was allied with Germany, meaning that when the two countries went to war, all those other countries began to get involved and go to war as well. Eventually, two power blocks formed, the Central Powers and the Allied Powers. In the Central Powers, we find Germany, Turkey, and Austria-Hungary. And over here in the Allied Powers, we find eventually the US, but at the start, France, Great Britain, Russia, and eventually Japan. But Abe, can you tell me where the US factored into all of this?
Well, fitting with his isolationist morale, Wilson issued a neutrality doctrine, steering between the Allied and Central Powers. Though there was support for Germany from America's millions of Germans, this sympathy was outweighed by Germany's strike against neutral Belgium and German plans to sabotage America's industrial capacity. So Frank, what was America's role in the opening years of World War I?
Well, throughout the opening years, America was trading and loaning money to the Allied powers. Germany was also free to trade with the US, but geographic barriers and the fact that the British began forcing American ships into British ports inhibited US-German trade. The Germans retaliated by establishing a submarine war area around Britain, and in 1914, the German U-boats or submarines began to be deployed en masse, meaning that by 1915, the British passenger ship Lusitania had been sunk by German U-boats. In fact, this led to the deaths of 128 Americans who were aboard the Lusitania when it sank. The Germans justified their sinking of the Lusitania by arguing that it was carrying ammunition, but the US, especially the East Coast, was heavily aggravated. Even though Germany promised not to sink passenger ships without warning, they shortly after torpedoed Sussex, a French passenger ship. Wilson declared that unless the Germans promised to never again sink another merchant ship without warning, he would break diplomatic relations. Germany agreed to Wilson's ultimatum, but attached a string by asking the US to persuade the Allies to modify their illegal blockade of trade. But Abe, I'm practically on the edge of my seat to find out. Did Wilson win re-election in 1916?
Before I tell you, you're going to have to sit on the edge of your seat for just a little longer. Roosevelt refused to run in the election of 1916, and he thus signaled the death of the Progressive Party. In Roosevelt's place, Charles Evan Hughes ran as the Republican candidate. Overall, the Republican Party denounced the Democratic tariff, Wilson's indecisiveness with relations with Mexico and Germany, and the Democratic assaults on trusts. Wilson, the Democratic candidate, ran against Hughes with the slogan, "He kept us out of war." The East voted predominantly for Hughes, but the election as a whole hinged on California. Wilson won California, and thus the election, with most of his support coming from the working class.
In conclusion, this chapter demonstrates what Wilson achieved during his first term in the Oval Office, how he brought progressive legislation to the table at home, and how he combated the rise of nationalism and militarism abroad, whether in Mexico or in Europe with World War I. We see that Wilson, traditionally progressive, traditionally isolationist, is brought and forced to deal with international players, whether or not he wants to.
Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.
And comment down below if you have any queries.
We will catch you guys in Chapter 30.